This podcast is sponsored by Success Day, an HR IT consultancy firm.
Good day, I'm René Janssen, CEO and founder of Lepaya, and you're listening to Meet the Mavericks, the HR Tech podcast.
Hi, I'm Anne Jaakke, and this is Meet the Mavericks, an HR Tech podcast by Success Day. In this series, we interview CEOs and founders of new, innovative HR solutions. We get to know what drives them and what their products or services are all about. Hopefully, this podcast brings inspiration to the HR community, celebrates entrepreneurial mavericks, and closes the gap between HR and tech. In this week's episode, we talk about Lepaya, an L&D technology and power skill training provider that promises to train learners in the right skill, the right time, and in the right way. Lepaya offers a blend of online, offline, virtual reality, and AI-powered training approaches all in one platform. What makes them really different? Today, I'm talking to their founder, René Janssen, about their journey. Welcome to the studio, René.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
First of all, thank you for joining Meet the Mavericks, which is an HR tech podcast, in order to celebrate, amongst others, founders of HR technology. So first of all, congratulations with the success of Lepaya.
Thank you.
And also want to know a little bit more about you before we go into what your business does. So would you like to share, first of all, your success formula? Because each founder, I believe, has something in their DNA or some secret ingredient that makes them successful and get them to a successful enterprise. So what's your success formula?
Yeah, I always find it a very hard question, but when I speak about this with the team and how did we get to where we are today and what do we need to do to make it even more successful in the future, for me, it's a lot about execution. So make sure you do the things that you today believe are right.
Yeah.
You execute them to the fullest of your ability.
Yeah.
Give it passion, give it drive, look at data, look at signals, look at feedback. And based on that, change, adjust, optimize as soon as possible. And I think, in my humble view, too many founders and other businesses get stuck in thinking mode, in strategizing mode. And I can say that having started my career as a strategy consultant, and do too much thinking and try to learn on paper as opposed to trying to learn in reality. And that's what we push the team towards. Do, make mistakes, and learn from that and optimize. And I think that's ultimately mostly what it is about.
So if I would say summarize this a little bit as execution, great execution, is that something that you took from your upbringing? Tell us a little bit about your background.
So corporate upbringing, probably yes. Personal background upbringing, probably no. But I do come from a family where my dad was a teacher. And it's not easy to spin that into a story that, of course, was brought up with education. But he has been in the education field for 40 years, has had his continuous complaints about how learning could be done better. And notably when he went into higher education, the big gap between what we learn in primary school, high school, higher education, and how that applies in the workforce. So probably at least subconsciously there was something that was always there. And if you go one level deeper, I think the one thing that my parents have done from day one, but in honesty still do today, is that it doesn't really matter what you do, but if you pick something, do it to the best of your abilities.
Yeah.
I studied history and philosophy of science. That is a degree that 10 people graduate with every year. And that's also, and that's more than there are jobs in that field.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter, but as long as you did it and you wanted to do it and you found it interesting, then you do it with a vengeance. And I think that still probably is, well, how I also operate today. Do what you believe in, but then try to do it to the best of your abilities.
So that's become part of your DNA.
I would say so, yeah.
And he must be very proud of you.
I think they are, yeah. It's not, as good Dutch people, it's maybe not what you discuss on a daily basis, but I think I can safely say yes.
And what type of family do you have today?
It's a very small family. I live together with my partner in Amsterdam. And the one thing I can say about her is that she's extremely supportive, even though we couldn't be more different. And I think you realize that, I'm probably a fairly high energy, opportunistic entrepreneur. And she is very good at being a lawyer for the Dutch government, which is really about structure, rhythm, regulations. So I think they tend to say opposites attract. And I think that's definitely true in our case.
So you balance each other out?
When things are well, we balance each other out. And well, let me not talk about the other thing. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's very, very collaborative. And I think we respect each other and our different viewpoints a lot.
So does that allow you also to spend a lot of time or your personal time into your business?
Well, at least if I make it very simple, the fact that I don't have kids gives me more time, fewer responsibilities, and then time spent on that part. I do think, so I have been in now my own, but before that also for 5 years in someone else's scale-up, and the continuous struggle in, there's always more work to be done. If you believe in execution, then definitely there's always more that you can do. So it is a continuous struggle of when is good enough, whether you push, also mentally being aware that taking time off to reflect, keeping a distance is important, and then trying to balance that bit. But if I do this, that will help now. Or if I step into a pitch review now, that will probably make the pitch better or that. So it is a continuous struggle between spending enough time
work-life
out
balance.
of the job.
Let's switch a little bit to getting to know more about Lepaya. So you just mentioned you've been working in somebody else's startup for the last couple of years. When did the journey of Lepaya started? And can you share a little bit about the last couple of years or months?
Yeah, and so exactly then. So it's a direct result from what I did before. So after spending some good old time at the Zuidas here, giving advice to other companies, I thought at some point, let me get my hands dirty. This is not how I want to continue my career. And I took the kind of extreme jump. So I moved to Southeast Asia and I joined a startup scale-up that was bringing e-commerce to the regions south of China, east of India, where there's probably 500 million people living. And some founders thought they probably want to shop online if there's a platform. So let's build a platform.
Wow, that's a totally different shift.
Yeah, so in all honesty, I told myself, maybe I'm back here in 6 months. I wasn't, but it was really about let me do something entirely different for a while and see if that, how interesting that is. Well, it turned out I thought it was more interesting to really build something than to give advice about building something. And for the first years, I was really on the building side. So I was on the commercial side of the team, trying to convince players to help bring e-commerce into the market, to entice people to sell online, which here is very common. But if you're in a country like Philippines or Indonesia with 15,000 islands, a population that still pays largely in cash, you really need to really change kind of the mindset of people. But we were very successful. We grew very fast. We went from 0 to about 5,000 people in 5 years' time. So total madhouse for those who have been in rapidly growing companies. They know what I'm talking about. And what we saw was that the productivity of the people that we had really rapidly starting to decline with the growth in the number of people. And at the same time, retention became a big issue because change was so rapid and so many people were coming in, and kind of how we looked at leadership wasn't structured at all in that growth phase. We saw people leaving probably as fast as we could hire them. Now at that point, I was responsible for one of the largest markets. So I was in charge of Indonesia, and I started to complain. Well, no. Let me put it differently. I started to tell the CEO that we could probably major gains to be made by moving HR from a function that just hired and paid salaries on time into a function that took care of how do we retain the best people, how do we develop the best people, how do we actually get consensus across the company, what good looks like. And in a way, he agreed with me, and in a way, he had other priorities, because after 6 years, we sold the company to Alibaba. And at that point, there was one big orange flag in their due diligence, which was our HR process and how do you bring it to the next level. Long story short, not because I was in any way brilliant about it, but probably because at least I had been voicing my opinion about this topic for a while. I got the question, hey, do you want to move out of Jakarta, come back to the head office and kind of build up HR processes for the group to a level that we need them on the ground in the different markets. That was where I was basically having a commercial background, suddenly became responsible for HR for, well, let's say a sizable mid-sized company, and was trying to answer or deal with some of the challenges that myself directly. And that's also where Lepaya comes from, because at that point I was trying to figure out, on the one hand, what do we expect from people at a certain moment in their career? But the moment you kind of establish that and do kind of feedback and performance management against that standard, the immediate next question is, how do you help people to then grow? And that's when I started to look into a lot of solutions in the market and kind of figured out that I didn't find a solution which, A, was teaching the right skills at the right moment in one's career. It was very often very much based on what people wanted to learn versus saying, hey, you have become a manager now. This is what sets a great manager apart from an average manager. So this is what we want to develop in you. 2, how do you do that with technology where possible? But because we're often talking human skills, how do you bring in the humans, the trainers, the facilitators, the actors to also play a valuable role in that? And thirdly, how do you scale that? I had 25 offices in 8 markets. And many vendors would say, we can cover these 3 or we can cover these 2. Well, if I want to bring leadership to the next level, I would want to do that across all my markets. So I was trying to look for a solution that kind of did these 3 things. Couldn't find it. And then being a bit opportunistic, I started to build my own solutions in-house. Couple of years later, I think I figured out that building HR processes I enjoy and I'm good at. Being an HR leader of a more established company, there's probably better people than me. So I left and came back to Holland and said, hey, there might also here in Holland be an opportunity, or in Europe be an opportunity for a company that kind of looks at L&D in a more modern way. Right skills, right time, right way, scalable. So I connected with an old colleague, an old friend, and said, we've been talking about entrepreneurship for a long time already. At some point, we either have to do it or to stop talking about it. For me, it's a great opportunity, a great moment. I've just relocated. I think if you ever want to kind of take the jump, this is the moment. And we said, okay, let's give ourselves 9 months or a year to figure out whether there's an opportunity in the field of doing upskilling better. That became Lepaya, and that's now 6.5 years ago.
So what do you guys exactly do? I mean, you're in the L&D space. You just mentioned you do training offline, online, and so on. But it's quite a competitive landscape. So what is it that sets yourself aside, or what makes it unique, your offering?
So there's a couple of things. You'll find a lot of startups will say we do one thing 10x better. I've been trying for 7 years to come up with that one thing. I couldn't find it, but it's a couple of things. So point one is we offer upskilling programs at specific career moments. So at which moment in your career do your skills most rapidly need to change to be effective? That's the moment where we come in and offer those programs. In those programs, we blend different learning methodologies together. In simple terms, we use tech-enabled learning, therefore typically self-paced learning, starting from e-learning, but also VR role plays, AI, immersive experiences, wherever possible. But where, for instance, you start to become a leader for the first time and you need to have the difficult conversation for the first time, tech today isn't going to get you there. So we bring in trainers, facilitators to help you practice with that specific part. And then we guide the learner back to how can we help you bridge that gap from theory to reality. I think we all know that we walked out of a training and said, that's wonderful, I'm going to change my life and tomorrow is going to be different. But by the end of the day, tomorrow, life hasn't changed. And your mailbox was full and your calendar was full, so today was the same. So how do you help people link that to what we call moments of truth? What are the moments in your calendar over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks when you really need to apply that? And how can we again use tech to nudge you, push you, enable you to really transfer those new skills which you possess and have practiced and can do in a safe environment into reality?
So Rene, one of the things that keeps my mind busy is actually a topic that have been discussed over the last year quite a lot with other CHROs, which is about skills. Because with the speed that technology is evolving, a lot of companies are struggling to understand what are the skills that their teams will need in the coming year, in the coming 2 years, in the coming 3 years, and how to deal with that. So one of the things that you mentioned is actually you wanting to train the right skill at the right moment. Well, actually, in this era, that's going to be already a challenge on itself. So can you first explain to me how do you do at Lepaya the skills inventory of where somebody is today and the skill demand, more or less, of what the role will require in the future? And how do you keep up with the speed? So those are more or less 2 questions in one.
Yeah. I can, and for me, it's important to build on what we just said. So that's how do you do training better? And then the question is, what do you train people on? Now, I think even in this day and age, it's good to say that a lot of skills aren't fundamentally changing. I mean, some of the skills that made someone a great leader were also the same 10 years ago. It was also back then about giving good feedback, about having the right performance conversation, about setting a direction from the team, about translating strategy in individual goals and all of that. So there is a whole bucket of skills where some of the how, and especially the language, and if you bring in D&I, a lot of more subtle ways in how you do it are changing, but the skills are fundamentally the same. And then there's indeed that other bucket of skills, which is moving very rapidly. We make a big cut there between those skills that you need across the company and those skills that you need in a specific domain or function. and we focus on the first. And we call that power skills. And those are those skills that will allow you to drive the productivity of your teams, also the team you're in. And in general are these skills that get you your next promotion. And the next promotion has never been gotten, or definitely should never be given, based on the fact that you're the best marketeer that knows SEO best, or the best developer that knows language X best, but really about how can you strive above that. So you do get to skills like, for instance, data-driven decision-making. To this day and age, how do you incorporate AI in the way that you work and your teams work? And if I'm being very simple, coming back to what I said before about execution, for me, there's 3 sources for this. One is our clients. Let's talk to them, both to HR, but also to a lot of people that we work with on a daily basis. What are you struggling with today? And what would help you tomorrow to make yourself better? We do look at a lot of research. I mean, the upshot of this being a hot field is that a lot of thought institutes are writing about this. And the third one is also our team, of course. We probably employ north of 20 learning scientists, which really keep their pulse on the market and saying what's developing. And what we try to blend all of that together in is, in essence, behaviors. So what do people need to do differently tomorrow? Something that you can see or hear or feel that's different from what's today. That's where we base our curriculum and our ongoing curriculum on. Then your last question is probably around how do you infer where the team sits today and where do you need to focus on? It's one of the more interesting questions, and also one of the questions where a lot of R&D still goes into today, and where I'm not going to give kind of the holy answer today, because I think we've gotten to a stage where on the hard skill side, there's now the first companies that can give you a proper inventory of what are the skills that you need to develop tomorrow. On the traditionally softer side, or what I call power skills, I think there's work to be done. The beauty is, though, that I think I was at a conference 3 years ago or so, where this was called the next $100 billion investment opportunity to assess that. And like things that get better with AI, I think this is one of those. So where we gotten 10 or maybe 100x more effective. So I do think over the next few years, you can really get to an assessment where you can really infer also on the non-hard skill side, which are the skills that are needed. But today, that's still combining a lot of data, tests, interviews, some objective data. So some of the simpler things you can now measure with AI. For instance, we could now tape this conversation live, and we would both get pointers on what we could do better. You probably not a lot, but I could speak less fast and I could move my hands a bit less and all of these kind of things. So for the more kind of mundane skills, you can already infer kind of levels and therefore gaps based on real direct observation. But this is the space which I think will really accelerate kind of very fast over the next couple of years. And where also a lot of our kind of research and development hours are going into at the same time. Because how beautiful would it be that I came to a company and could really say, this is a scan, this is where you stand today, this is where your industry has the biggest gaps. And therefore, we can use our methodology, which is already pretty unique, to actually fill those gaps in the most effective way. Second step we can already do. First step, I think we're further than most players. But there's also, if I close my eyes, this is what in 3 or 5 years will be much better.
Yeah, because when you look at the average company in the Netherlands, where would you say they sit with their L&D offering?
I think the average is very hard. So we look at it indeed the maturity levels where you find it a bit across the board. But I think on the higher end, you really have some corporates or companies in a broad sense that really think about this from a strategic point of view, that really say, hey, we have our workforce, this is the challenges, or even just our strategy for 2028 or 2030. And this is the gaps that we see. And we can already start building the skills that we need tomorrow by investing in the team today. It's the whole concept of quiet hiring in a sense. You're not hiring people for the right skills, but you're making sure you develop your talent now so they can move into the role with the right skills that they need in a year or 2 or 3 from now. Is that the majority? I don't think so. I think the majority is still somewhere in the middle bucket where it's clear that L&D is not just something that managers want to training and hence we deliver training. There's still kind of the laggards which are there. I think there's a lot of middle bucket that is driving a lot of business value today. So there's a problem today and we have great programs and solutions that try to solve those, and to some extent we can prove it, but they're not yet thinking about where should we be in 3 to 5 years and what role can L&D play already in that today.
Yeah, and I guess one of the challenges that a lot of companies have or L&D teams have is that they already have a certain, let's say, learning management solution, or they have a certain platform, or they have a certain methodology that they have been using for the last couple of years, or things have been flowing along with e-learning, and then suddenly somebody says, okay, we want to have a new leadership philosophy. Can you build a leadership program? So there's a lot of elements that over time, like bricks, that have been used to build. So when you start working with a company, what is it that you do from the start? Do you get only the request to target a certain group or a certain program, or do you research what they already have been utilizing? How does that work?
I'll give you the ideal answer and then the practical answer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because the ideal answer is exactly what you say, right? So really, what is the business objectives you're trying to achieve? What do you today have in place to get there? What is the reason that we're still talking? Because apparently it's not perfect yet, so we can build on that. And how can you really build something in between? In all openness, the reality is often more that companies have already set a goal and a purpose and are looking for a product or solution. So we need a new approach for our leadership program, or we need a new approach for attracting talent, your good old talent programs. We pitch and we get in on the whole story I told about a better methodology and more impact. And once you start working with a company, you really build on that and build kind of a much more comprehensive framework, slowly and over time. On top of that, saying, hey, we've now established that hopefully we can do things a bit better, more impactful than some of the more traditional vendors. And how can we kind of scale that to a larger part of your organization? So it's a very, in scale-up terms, it's very land and expand. So you come in, prove your value, and slowly move your way up into more strategic solutions.
Because it's quite brave that you started this company, when you come back to the Netherlands, because the competitiveness in this landscape is quite intense, no?
I wouldn't necessarily call it brave. Other people have called it stubborn or dumb, right out. But yes and no. So on the one hand, there's a lot of competition. And on the other hand, it's one of the more fragmented fields you'll find kind of in any industry. And I think this is one of the cases where fragmentation is stifling innovation. Because there's so many players. And I think there's way too many L&D managers today that just have a couple of vendors on speed dial and work with them today, which are not necessarily bad, but were not necessarily great either. And that especially if you look at the change in technology over the past couple of years, use of data, use of AI, use of VR, can't make the investment or the growth that's required in that. So I think we also had the vision that this is an industry really ripe for disruption, ripe for shaping up based on kind of the relevant investments that all the players can't make. But still you need to execute correctly because it's whom you are competing against. Because it's different, in some places harder and in some ways easier than starting a new category or a new approach. But and simply put, I think it also comes from having been on the other side of the table. I mean, I literally couldn't find what I was looking for, and I was quite precise what I wanted. So I built it in-house. And back in my HR director days, it's not that my priority would have been to build a whole L&D approach and portfolio from scratch. That was not my goal when I started it out. I did it because I couldn't find what I was looking for. And that's also the pitch I still have, but my team still has. Are you really happy with what you're doing today? Or if you really close your eyes, look at where you want to be in 5 years from now, and then think the solution you have in place. What should we do?
Talking about your team, can you tell us a little bit how big is your company, both from headcount or turnover, location and so on?
So we don't share a lot of information on revenue, but we have about 250, 260 people spread around 4 main markets, which is Holland, UK, Germany, and France, and then remote teams in Belgium and Switzerland. So really focusing on European headquarters. Team is overall neatly split in 2 halves. One half is really all about product, which is all the way from your hard tech and data to learning scientists, curriculum designers, intervention designers, and all of that. And the other half is ultimately client-facing, all the way from die-hard sales, because you also having been on the HR side, you need to get that foot in the door and have that first conversation, but to also the ones that really help then roll out kind of these programs, measure the impact, measure the interventions, and really build kind of going,
And what type of clients do you have?
All the names that you can think of, if now names pop up, but we go kind of all the way up. The majority, almost 2/3 of our clients are your larger corporates. Your larger corporates across industries. So typically starting from industries that have a lot of focus on attracting and retaining the right talent, professional services, financial services, but also a lot in retail, in manufacturing, industrial good, logistics, really across the board. And then we have in number a lot more, but as that goes in revenue, a lot smaller kind of companies in the mid-market segment. So typically a lot of companies, let's say between 200 and 2,000 employees that really have a strategic view on not doing L&D because you need to, but doing L&D because that allows you to retain and develop the right talent. Yeah.
So we're getting a little bit to the end of the podcast, but I have 2 or 3 remaining questions for you. First of all, I was intrigued by the fact that you've had a previous career as an HR director as well. And now I assume you have a lot of dealings with HR when you're selling your proposition of Lepaya. What are the things, if you could have a magic wand, would you change in the interactions of HR with, not necessarily Lepaya, but just with HR tech providers in general? Is there something that you would like to change?
Yes, I always like to change things. I think in general, and that's also why I'm so happy that you're kind of running this series of podcasts, is that a large share of HR is still kind of internally focused, and that's great because those are your clients. You serve the rest of the business, you make them better. But kind of strategically thinking, how can we really improve the business? Also requires taking a broader look outside. What are both my peers doing, but also what's really happening in the tech landscape?
Yeah.
I mean, the world is changing faster than ever. So I have a view on what is the modern technology that are coming up, and probably at a minimum dare to experiment. Of course, I would love to always get in and immediately kind of overthrow an L&D strategy. But let's be honest, I wouldn't have done that either, or I didn't do that either when I was in the buying seat. But really saying, hey, how can we find a nice way to start working with some of these emerging players, test some of the technology, really give them a real chance and find ways, it's important, but to deal with procurement, but also things like data and security, because the integrations are today also what makes it work. You can only measure productivity if you tap into your core HR systems and get some of the data out. So how do you maybe, if you make it very practically, have some internal kind of champions that really want to push for innovation and test it? Not all the innovation will work, but I think you need to kind of make sure that finds a place in your company. Otherwise, some of your competitors will do, and that's a shame.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. But I also know that that's one of the hardest challenges that they have, because often HR also has to deal with IT internally, finance, procurement, contract management, but also all kinds of regulations, departments that have raised over the last couple of years with cybersecurity and so on, that piloting has become more and more difficult. You know, even setting up a pilot is almost like onboarding a new company. But totally with you that it would tremendously help giving the HR tech community also the possibility to showcase and test their products, and the other way around for HR communities to kind of experience what it could bring to their landscape. Final question on this actually is, I've been asking this to each of the Mavericks coming here. I mean, you've clearly been able to tell a story about Lepaya and why you think it is great offering that you have. But what are another HR tech company or an HR tech provider or another Maverick that you think would be interesting? Not something that, you know, is in your business suite, but something that you have been watching or following, or that you think that they're doing great stuff?
I think there are tons in the end. I mean, if I really start from the core, I think it's truly impressive how a company like Personio has overthrown maybe the hegemony of the traditional core HR systems and really build a platform that in mid-market or mid-market plus is making a massive impact. I think in all openness on the recruitment, the jury is still out. There are some platforms, but there's still a lot of room to do that 10x better. But I think also if you look at kind of good old Comp and Ben, we were stuck with kind of paying 20, 30, 40K euros for data sets that would arrive in Excel files. And if you would look at companies like Figures or Ravio or so, I think they really have kind of democratized kind of access to benchmarking and and in comparative studies on Comp and Ben for a much more affordable kind of fee, including real-time updates and all of that. I'm sure there's more, but top of mind.
Yeah.
I think that's.
I'm sure they're going to be super happy that you mentioned them. I'm actually looked into Ravio last year when we were at the HR Tech Awards, and I think that they're also offering amazing products.
Yeah, and I think really solving core problems.
Yeah.
As opposed to just doing something new. Really just saying, this is pain. How do we do that with today's technology and approach better? Which I like.
Thank you so much for joining us today and spending some time explaining what Lepaya has to offer, but also for us to meet you, because at the end, you are a maverick, clearly going from the other end of the world and from HR, setting up a company like yours with the size that you have achieved today. Well done. Keep going.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Meet the Mavericks, an HR Tech podcast. For more information about this episode, check out the show notes. And don't forget to listen to our next episode.